Standing in my dorm room staring at Dad's text message, I felt my world crumble. Attend Madison's wedding or lose your tuition. Your choice, Serafina. My golden sister's perfect wedding to her perfect fiancé, the same event I'd refused to attend after discovering she'd stolen my scholarship recommendation letter 3 years ago. The same letter that would have changed everything. Dad had always chosen her, but threatening my education, that crossed every line. What I didn't know was that this wedding would expose secrets that would destroy our family forever. And the real reason Dad was so desperate for me to be there had nothing to do with family unity. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. If you love dramatic family revenge stories like this one, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you will not believe how this unfolds. The twists coming up will absolutely blow your mind, so stick around until the very end. The drive home felt like a funeral procession. 3 years at Northwestern University, maintaining a 4.0 GPA in biochemistry, working 2 part-time jobs. All potentially wasted because of Madison's wedding. My sister, 2 years younger, but somehow always ahead, had orchestrated her life like a master chess player while I struggled for every achievement. The scholarship incident still burned. Senior year of high school, I'd worked months with my chemistry teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, crafting the perfect recommendation for the Henderson Science Scholarship, full ride to any university. The night before submission, the letter mysteriously vanished from our home printer. A week later, Madison submitted an identical letter claiming Mrs. Rodriguez had written it for her chemistry club leadership. She won the scholarship to Princeton. When I confronted Mrs. Rodriguez, she was devastated. She'd never written anything for Madison, who barely passed chemistry. But with no proof and the submission deadline passed, I watched my sister accept my stolen opportunity at the school assembly, our parents beaming with pride. Dad's financial support for my education always came with strings. Perfect grades, complete obedience, and absolutely no criticism of his precious Madison. Mom had died when I was 12, leaving Dad to navigate raising 2 daughters alone. Instead of growing closer, we'd fractured along lines of favoritism that seemed carved in stone. Madison's engagement to Trevor Worthington, the third heir to a real estate empire, had been front-page news in our small Connecticut town. Their relationship was social media perfection, charity galas, European vacations, and coordinated outfits that screamed old money sophistication. Meanwhile, I lived on ramen noodles and library coffee, invisible to my own family unless they needed something. The wedding preparations had consumed 18 months of our lives. Dad hired the most expensive wedding planner in the state, booked the historic Rosecliff Mansion, and flew in flowers from Ecuador. The guest list read like a who's who of Connecticut's elite. Senators, CEOs, and celebrities who'd never acknowledged our middle-class family's existence before Madison's engagement. But something felt wrong about this entire production. Dad's insistence on my attendance went beyond normal family expectations. His threats weren't just about missing the wedding. He'd specifically demanded I be present for every single event. The rehearsal dinner, the ceremony, the reception, even the post-wedding brunch. His exact words haunted me. Serafina must be there for everything or there are consequences. 3 days before the wedding, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of boycotting like I'd planned, I would attend, but not as the obedient daughter. I would watch, listen, and finally gather proof of the favoritism and manipulation that had defined our family dynamics. The rehearsal dinner at the country club was a masterclass in Madison's performance art. She glided between tables in a designer dress that cost more than my semester's textbooks, accepting compliments and air kisses like a debutante queen. But I noticed things others missed. Hushed conversations between Dad and Trevor's father, worried glances exchanged between the wedding planner and caterer, and most telling of all, Madison's periodic disappearances to take urgent phone calls. During one of these absences, I overheard Trevor's mother, Patricia Worthington, speaking to her sister. Richard assured us everything was legitimate, the business partnerships, the investments. He showed us documentation, but if there are problems with the SEC investigation... Her voice trailed off as she noticed me nearby. SEC investigation. Dad owned a small accounting firm with 3 employees. What business partnerships could possibly interest federal regulators? But before I could process this information fully, Madison returned radiant and demanding everyone's attention for another toast. That night, sleep was impossible. Every conversation, every worried look, every whispered exchange replayed in my mind. Something was fundamentally wrong with this fairy tale wedding, and somehow my forced attendance was connected to whatever Dad was hiding. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned gray and ominous, matching my mood perfectly. Rosecliff Mansion buzzed with an army of vendors, photographers, and coordinators orchestrating what the society pages would later call the wedding of the decade. But beneath the surface glamour, I sensed an undercurrent of panic that had nothing to do with typical wedding day nerves. Dad paced the grounds like a caged animal, checking his phone obsessively and snapping at anyone who approached him. Madison, typically unflappable, seemed brittle around the edges, her perfect smile flickering whenever she thought no one was watching. Even Trevor, usually confident to the point of arrogance, kept tugging at his collar and glancing toward the mansion's entrance as if expecting unwelcome guests. As the maid of honor, a role I'd never wanted but couldn't refuse without losing my tuition, I had access to family areas off limits to regular guests. While helping Madison with final preparations, I witnessed a heated phone conversation that made my blood run cold. "You promised me this would be handled before today," Madison hissed into her phone, pacing the bridal suite in her $10,000 gown. "I cannot have federal agents showing up at my wedding reception. Do you understand what this would do to Trevor's family, to our reputation?" Federal agents. My hands trembled as I pretended to arrange her veil. This wasn't about business partnerships or SEC investigations. This was about criminal activity serious enough to warrant federal attention. Madison's voice dropped to a whisper, but in the marble-walled suite, every word carried. "Dad's been using my engagement and wedding as cover for months. All those meetings disguised as wedding planning, all those transfers labeled as wedding expenses. If they trace the money trail back to today—" She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, Serafina doesn't know anything. Dad made sure of that. But we needed her here as the perfect family tableau when everything goes public." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. I wasn't attending this wedding as Madison's sister. I was an unwitting prop in an elaborate cover-up. Dad hadn't threatened my tuition out of sentiment. He'd needed both daughters present to maintain the illusion of a loving, successful family when federal investigators came knocking. But Madison had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was still the naive older sister who'd let her steal my scholarship without fighting back. 3 years of independence had taught me to think strategically, and I'd been recording our conversation on my phone from the moment she'd started pacing. The ceremony proceeded like a fever dream. 200 guests filled the mansion's grand ballroom, witnessing vows between 2 people whose families were apparently built on lies and criminal activity. I stood at the altar, bouquet in hand, watching my sister marry into old money while our father used the occasion to launder whatever illegal profits had funded this spectacular charade. During the reception's cocktail hour, I excused myself to the bathroom and transcribed every word of Madison's phone conversation. The recording was clear, her admissions explicit, and the implications staggering. But I needed more than one conversation to bring down whatever criminal enterprise had been masquerading as our family business. The opportunity came during dinner when Dad stepped outside to take yet another urgent call. Using skills learned from detective podcasts and true crime documentaries, I followed at a distance, my phone recording everything. "The wedding went perfectly," Dad said, his voice carrying across the mansion's gardens. "Both girls were here just like you needed." Serafina looked appropriately shocked when Madison mentioned the investigation, but she doesn't understand the bigger picture. She never has. His companion's response was too quiet to hear, but Dad's next words made my knees weak. $23 million moved through wedding vendor accounts over 18 months. Every payment legitimate on paper, every invoice properly documented. Madison's engagement gave us the perfect cover story. Wealthy families planning an extravagant wedding. Even if federal investigators audit every transaction, they'll find nothing but evidence of excessive wedding planning. $23 million, laundered through fake wedding expenses. using Madison's engagement and my forced attendance to create a believable family narrative that would withstand federal scrutiny. But the conversation wasn't over. Dad's voice took on a cold, calculating tone that I'd never heard before. Serafina's student loans are in my name, co-signed with guarantees I can revoke at any time. She'll never risk her education by asking questions about family finances. And Madison, he laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. Madison's been my partner in this from the beginning. The scholarship theft was her audition, proof she could eliminate obstacles without hesitation. Partner, not victim, not unknowing beneficiary. Active partner in whatever criminal enterprise had funded our lives for years. The sister I'd mourned losing to favoritism had never existed. She'd been Dad's accomplice since high school, maybe longer. Standing in the shadows of rose bushes that cost more than most people's cars, I realized that my entire family was a criminal conspiracy, and I'd been their unwitting cover story for years. The revelation of my family's criminal enterprise left me reeling, but 3 years of academic pressure had taught me to think clearly under stress. I couldn't confront Dad and Madison directly. They held too much power over my education and future. Instead, I needed allies' evidence and a strategy that would protect me while exposing their crimes. My first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During the wedding reception's dancing portion, I struck up a conversation with Janet Morrison Trevor's aunt and a former federal prosecutor turned private attorney. Janet had seemed uncomfortable all evening nursing the same glass of wine while observing the festivities with the sharp attention of someone trained to spot inconsistencies. "You're the biochemistry student," Janet said when I introduced myself. "Trevor mentioned you're at Northwestern on academic merit, not family money." Her emphasis on the last phrase felt pointed almost like a test. "I work hard for everything I achieve," I replied carefully. "Nothing's been handed to me." Janet nodded approvingly. "That's refreshing in this crowd. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual about your father's business lately? Sudden prosperity, perhaps? New clients with interesting payment methods?" Her questions were too specific to be casual conversation. Janet suspected something, and her prosecutorial instincts had identified me as a potential ally, rather than a co-conspirator. Taking a calculated risk, I decided to trust her with part of what I'd discovered. "I overheard some concerning conversations today," I said quietly, "about SEC investigations and money movements. But I don't understand the full picture." Janet's expression hardened. "Your father's accounting firm has been flagged by multiple federal agencies for suspicious financial activity. The wedding expenses alone exceeded what most people earn in a lifetime, all paid through business accounts with no clear source of legitimate income." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been investigating white-collar crime for 25 years, and this wedding has more red flags than a communist parade. If you're truly innocent in this, you need legal protection immediately." Janet became my first crucial ally, offering to represent me pro bono if I could provide evidence of the criminal activity. But she warned that federal investigators were likely already building cases against Dad and Madison, and being present at this wedding had potentially made me a person of interest. My second ally emerged during the late evening reception when exhaustion and alcohol had loosened tongues throughout the ballroom. Marcus Chin Trevor's college roommate and now a forensic accountant for white-collar crime investigations had been quietly documenting inconsistencies all night. "Your sister's engagement ring cost more than most people's annual salary," Marcus told me during a quiet moment on the mansion's terrace. "But according to public records, your father's accounting firm reported a net income last year that wouldn't cover the catering budget for tonight's dinner." Marcus had been conducting his own informal investigation triggered by Trevor's increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. As Trevor's closest friend, Marcus had noticed expensive purchases, secretive phone calls, and a growing paranoia that suggested involvement in something far more serious than accounting irregularities. "Trevor's not a criminal mastermind," Marcus explained. "He's a privileged kid who got in over his head with the wrong people. Your father and sister, though, they're running this operation. Trevor's just their entry point into legitimate high society." Marcus offered to share his financial analysis with federal investigators in exchange for immunity, but he needed insider information to complete the picture. My recordings and observations could provide the missing pieces that would bring down the entire network. The third member of my alliance came from within the wedding staff itself. Elena Rodriguez, the event coordinator I'd initially dismissed as just another expensive vendor, approached me during the reception's final hour with information that changed everything. "I've been planning events for 15 years," Elena said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "I've seen wealthy families throw extravagant parties, but this is different. The payments, the vendor selections, the insistence on specific documentation. This isn't wedding planning. This is money laundering with a wedding theme." Elena had been documenting irregularities throughout the planning process, initially for her own protection, but increasingly out of moral obligation. Fake invoices inflated costs payments to vendors who provided minimal services. The entire wedding had been designed as a financial shell game rather than a celebration. "Your father specifically requested vendors with international connections and flexible invoicing practices," Elena revealed. "Half the flowers were supposedly flown in from Ecuador, but they're actually local arrangements marked up by 3,000%. The cake decorator charged $40,000 for what's essentially a grocery store sheet cake with expensive decorations." Elena had kept meticulous records, knowing that eventually someone would ask questions about the astronomical costs and suspicious payment methods. She offered to testify about the fraudulent vendor schemes in exchange for witness protection, recognizing that exposing this level of organized crime would put her in danger. By midnight, as the last guests departed and Madison basked in the afterglow of her perfect wedding day, I had assembled a formidable alliance: a former federal prosecutor, a forensic accountant, and an event coordinator with detailed documentation of the money laundering operation. Each ally brought unique expertise and evidence that, when combined with my insider recordings, created an ironclad case against Dad and Madison's criminal enterprise. But our work was far from over. Federal investigators typically moved slowly, building comprehensive cases before making arrests. Dad and Madison would likely have weeks or months to discover our investigation and take countermeasures. Worse, they still controlled my education funding, giving them leverage to silence me or force my cooperation. As I finally returned to my hotel room exhausted but determined, I received a text message that made my blood run cold. "We need to talk tomorrow before you return to school. There are family matters to discuss. Dad." He knew. Somehow, despite my careful precautions, Dad suspected that I'd discovered more than he'd intended me to learn. The alliance I'd built tonight would be tested much sooner than any of us had anticipated. Tomorrow would determine whether I was strong enough to bring down my own family's criminal empire, or whether years of manipulation and control would ultimately force me back into the role of unwitting accomplice. Dad's family meeting took place in his home office the next morning, the same room where I'd once proudly displayed my academic achievements before Madison's golden glow overshadowed everything. Sitting across from his mahogany desk, I felt like a defendant awaiting sentencing rather than a daughter having a conversation. "You were very observant yesterday." Dad began, his tone deceptively casual. "Wedding receptions can be overwhelming with all the conversations and excitement. Sometimes people mishear things or take comments out of context." His meaning was crystal clear. Deny what I'd heard, pretend ignorance, and continue playing my role as the naive daughter. But I'd prepared for this moment all night, rehearsing responses that would buy time while protecting my allies. "It was a beautiful wedding," I replied carefully. "Madison looked radiant. I'm sure she and Trevor will be very happy together." Dad's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad you understand the importance of family loyalty, especially during challenging times. Your tuition payment for next semester is due in 2 weeks. I'd hate for any misunderstandings to affect your academic future." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Comply or lose everything I'd worked to achieve. But I had allies now, people who understood the stakes and were willing to fight alongside me, or so I believed. That afternoon, I met with Janet Morrison at her law office to discuss legal protection strategies. Janet had spent the morning reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, and her assessment was grimmer than I'd expected. "The recordings are excellent, but they're not enough for immediate action," Janet explained. "Federal prosecutors need ironclad cases for white-collar crime prosecutions. We need financial records documentation of the money trails and preferably additional witnesses who can testify about the criminal activities. Janet's plan was methodical but slow. Gather more evidence over several months, build relationships with federal investigators, and gradually construct a case that would withstand the inevitable legal challenges from expensive defense attorneys. The timeline meant enduring another semester under Dad's financial control while pretending ignorance about his crimes. But Janet had also been researching my family's background, and what she'd discovered was disturbing. Your father's accounting firm has been under federal surveillance for 8 months. The wedding wasn't just a money laundering operation. It was likely the final phase before a planned disappearance. Madison's marriage to Trevor gives them access to international banking networks and offshore accounts that would be nearly impossible to trace. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Dad and Madison weren't just criminals. They were preparing to flee the country, leaving me behind to face potential federal charges as an apparent co-conspirator. My forced attendance at the wedding wasn't about family unity. It was about creating evidence that I was complicit in their crimes. Janet's revelation should have strengthened my resolve, but instead it triggered a cascade of betrayals that nearly destroyed everything. The first betrayal came from Marcus Trevor's roommate and forensic accountant, who'd seemed so committed to exposing the truth. When I contacted him to share Janet's findings, his response was devastating. "I can't be involved in this investigation anymore," Marcus told me over a tense phone call. "Trevor's family has offered me a position with their investment firm. It's a career opportunity I can't refuse, and they've made it clear that any involvement in federal investigations would be incompatible with my employment." Marcus had been bought off his moral outrage, purchased with a lucrative job offer that would secure his financial future. Without his forensic expertise and analysis of the money laundering schemes, our case lost crucial technical credibility. The second betrayal was more personal and far more painful. Elena Rodriguez, the event coordinator who documented the fraudulent vendor schemes, called me in tears 3 days after our initial meeting. "They know about our conversation," Elena sobbed. "Someone told your father about my records, about the evidence I'd been keeping. He's threatening to destroy my business, sue me for breach of contract, and have me blacklisted from every major venue in Connecticut." Elena's terror was palpable through the phone. "I have 2 children, Serafina. I can't lose everything fighting battles I'm not equipped to win. I'm so sorry, but I have to withdraw from any investigation. I've already destroyed the documentation I showed you." And just like that, 2 of my 3 crucial allies had abandoned the cause, leaving Janet and me to face a criminal conspiracy with resources far exceeding our ability to combat them. But the worst betrayal was yet to come, and it would shake my faith in my own judgment more than Dad's crimes or my sister's partnership in evil. Janet Morrison, the federal prosecutor I'd trusted with my safety and future, revealed her true agenda during what I'd thought was a strategy session. Instead of discussing our next moves, Janet presented me with a folder containing legal documents that made my blood freeze. "These are immunity agreements." Janet explained, her tone suddenly businesslike and cold. "Your father contacted me yesterday with a comprehensive offer. Full cooperation with federal investigators, complete financial disclosure, and testimony against his criminal associates in exchange for reduced sentences and witness protection." I stared at the documents, unable to process what I was seeing. "You're representing my father now." "I'm representing the interests of justice," Janet replied smoothly. "Your father's cooperation will bring down a much larger criminal network than just his accounting firm. The information he provides could lead to dozens of arrests and the recovery of hundreds of millions in stolen assets." Janet's betrayal was complete and calculated. She'd used my trust and evidence to negotiate a better deal for Dad, positioning herself as the attorney who'd facilitated his cooperation rather than the prosecutor seeking to convict him. My recordings, my observations, my insider knowledge, all of it had been weaponized against me. "Where does this leave me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "That depends entirely on your willingness to cooperate," Janet replied. "Your father's immunity agreement includes protection for immediate family members who provide testimony against external criminal associates. You can be part of the solution, or you can be classified as part of the problem." The choice was stark: betray whatever criminals Dad had been working with or face federal prosecution as an apparent co-conspirator in money laundering schemes I'd had no knowledge of until the wedding day. Sitting in Janet's office, surrounded by the legal documents that would determine my fate, I realized that my alliance had been an illusion from the beginning. Dad had anticipated every move, manipulated every relationship, and orchestrated even my rebellion to serve his ultimate plan. But he'd made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He'd assumed that years of control and manipulation had broken my spirit completely, that I would accept whatever deal he offered rather than risk everything fighting back. He was wrong, and his underestimation of my determination would prove to be his downfall. The betrayal by my supposed allies left me isolated and desperate, but it also clarified something important. I couldn't trust anyone connected to my family's social circle or professional network. Dad's influence ran deeper than I'd imagined, and his ability to corrupt or intimidate potential allies was formidable. But isolation had taught me self-reliance, and desperation had sharpened my strategic thinking. 3 days after Janet's betrayal, I made a decision that would either save me or destroy any chance of escape from my family's criminal web. Instead of accepting Dad's immunity deal or fleeing to avoid federal prosecution, I would go directly to the FBI with everything I knew, bypassing the compromised local networks entirely. My research led me to Agent Sarah Chin, a federal investigator specializing in financial crimes who had no connections to Connecticut's legal community. Agent Chin had built her reputation prosecuting complex money laundering cases, and her track record suggested both competence and integrity that couldn't be purchased with job offers or intimidated with threats. Our meeting took place in a federal building in New York City, far from Dad's sphere of influence. Agent Chin was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct communication style that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me everything," Agent Chin said after I'd explained the basic situation. "Don't edit anything, don't try to protect anyone, and don't worry about implicating yourself. I need the complete truth to determine how to proceed." For 3 hours, I laid out the entire story: Madison's scholarship theft, Dad's financial threats, the wedding surveillance, the recorded conversations, and the subsequent betrayals by my supposed allies. Agent Chin listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just absorbing the massive scope of criminal activity I was describing. "Your father's accounting firm has been under federal surveillance for 14 months, Agent Chin finally revealed. "We've been building cases against multiple criminal organizations that used his services for money laundering, but we lacked insider evidence of how the schemes operated. Your recordings and observations provide crucial missing pieces." Agent Chin's next revelation stunned me completely. "Your sister Madison isn't just your father's partner in crime. She's been an FBI informant for the past 6 months. The room seemed to spin around me. Madison, an FBI informant. The sister who'd stolen my scholarship and manipulated our family dynamics for years was secretly working with federal investigators. "Madison approached us after realizing the scope of your father's criminal activities," Agent Chin explained. "She'd initially thought she was helping with tax avoidance strategies and legitimate business arrangements. When she discovered the true nature of his operations, she agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity and witness protection." Everything I thought I knew about my family's dynamics was wrong. Madison hadn't been Dad's criminal partner. She'd been his unwilling accomplice, who'd eventually found the courage to seek help from federal authorities. Her participation in the wedding money laundering had been part of an elaborate FBI sting operation designed to gather evidence against Dad and his criminal associates. "The phone conversation you overheard wasn't Madison coordinating criminal activities," Agent Chin continued. "She was reporting to her FBI handler about your unexpected surveillance. We'd been concerned that your presence at the wedding might compromise the operation, but your recordings actually strengthened our case considerably." And Agent Chin showed me photographs taken during the wedding reception. Federal agents disguised as catering staff, photographers, and even guests, all documenting the money laundering operation in real time. The wedding I'd thought was a criminal conspiracy had actually been a federal sting operation with Madison as the primary informant. "Your father is scheduled to be arrested next week," Agent Chin revealed. We have sufficient evidence for multiple federal charges: money laundering, fraud, tax evasion, and racketeering. The criminal network he's been serving includes drug traffickers, arms dealers, and human trafficking organizations. His cooperation deal with local prosecutors is worthless because federal charges supersede state immunity agreements. But Agent Chin had saved the most important information for last. Madison specifically requested that you be protected throughout this investigation. She knew your father would try to manipulate you into complicity, and she's been working to ensure your innocence was clearly documented. The tuition threats, the forced wedding attendance, even the immunity deal offer. Madison helped us gather evidence of your father's attempts to make you an unwilling accomplice. The sister I'd resented for years had actually been protecting me from criminal prosecution while risking her own safety as an undercover informant. Every slight, every moment of favoritism, every instance of golden child treatment, it had all been carefully orchestrated to maintain her cover while shielding me from Dad's criminal activities. We need you to testify about your father's attempts to manipulate you into complicity, Agent Chin explained. Your testimony, combined with Madison's informant evidence and our surveillance documentation, will ensure convictions on all charges. But we also need you to maintain normal family interactions until the arrests occur. Can you handle that level of deception? Sitting in that federal building learning that my entire understanding of my family had been inverted, I felt a strange mixture of relief and vertigo. I wasn't the only honest family member after all. Madison had found her own path to justice, even if it had required years of dangerous deception. 3 days later, I returned to Northwestern University with a new phone provided by the FBI and instructions to act normally while federal agents positioned themselves for coordinated arrests. Dad's text messages about tuition payments and family loyalty took on new meaning when I knew federal prosecutors were monitoring every communication. Madison called me the night before Dad's arrest, her voice carefully neutral in case the call was being monitored by his criminal associates. I wanted you to know that I've always been proud of your academic achievements. She said words that would sound like sisterly sentiment to anyone listening, but carried deeper meaning for me. You've always been the stronger sister even when I got more attention. That strength is going to be important in the coming days. Her message was clear. Stay strong, trust the process, and remember that justice was finally coming for our family's victims. The coordinated arrests happened at dawn on a Tuesday morning with federal agents simultaneously raiding Dad's accounting firm, our family home, and Madison's apartment. I watched from my dorm room via news coverage as FBI agents led Dad away in handcuffs, his face showing none of the arrogant confidence that had defined my childhood memories. The local news initially portrayed it as a routine white-collar crime investigation, but as federal prosecutors unsealed indictments throughout the week, the true scope of Dad's criminal enterprise became clear. $23 million in laundered money connections to international drug cartels and a client list that read like a directory of organized crime figures from across the northeastern United States. Madison's role as an FBI informant remained classified for her protection, but federal prosecutors allowed me to visit her in witness protection while she prepared for upcoming trials. Seeing my sister in a safe house surrounded by federal marshals and speaking openly for the first time in years felt like meeting a stranger who happened to share my DNA. I stole your scholarship because Dad threatened to withdraw support for my college applications if I didn't eliminate the competition, Madison explained, tears streaming down her face. I was 17 and terrified, and I thought academic success was the only thing that mattered. I didn't understand that he was already grooming me to be his accomplice in much worse crimes. Madison's confession about the scholarship was both devastating and liberating. The betrayal that had defined our relationship for years had been coerced, another example of Dad's manipulation tactics. But her willingness to eventually seek help and cooperate with federal investigators had taken courage I hadn't recognized. When did you realize what Dad was really doing? I asked. During my sophomore year at Princeton, Madison replied. He started asking me to use my student accounts for financial transactions, claiming it was legitimate business banking. When I researched the companies involved, I discovered connections to criminal organizations that made me physically sick. That's when I contacted the FBI. Madison had spent 4 years as an undercover informant, enduring our family's dysfunction while secretly gathering evidence that would eventually bring down multiple criminal enterprises. Her engagement to Trevor had been genuine initially, but federal investigators had encouraged the relationship when they realized his family's international connections could provide access to offshore banking networks used by Dad's criminal clients. The trials proceeded throughout my senior year at Northwestern, with Dad ultimately pleading guilty to avoid life imprisonment and receiving a 25-year federal sentence. His criminal associates received similar sentences, and federal investigators recovered over $40 million in stolen assets that were returned to victims of various crimes. Janet Morrison, the attorney who'd betrayed my trust, faced disciplinary action from the state bar for her attempt to secretly represent both sides of a federal investigation. Marcus Chin lost his promised position with Trevor's family when his attempted corruption became part of the federal evidence record. Elena Rodriguez, the event coordinator who'd been intimidated into silence, received witness protection assistance and relocated to another state where she rebuilt her business under a new identity. Trevor, surprisingly, had been genuinely ignorant of the criminal activities surrounding his wedding. His family's wealth had made him an attractive target for money laundering schemes, but federal investigators determined he'd been an unwitting victim rather than a conspirator. His marriage to Madison survived the trials, strengthened by shared trauma and Madison's courage in seeking justice. As for me, federal prosecutors confirmed my complete innocence and provided documentation clearing my name from any association with Dad's crimes. The tuition he'd threatened to cancel was replaced by a federal victim assistance program and academic scholarships that recognized my achievements independent of family finances. But the most profound change was personal rather than legal. Madison and I began rebuilding our relationship from scratch, establishing trust through honest communication rather than the competitive dynamics Dad had fostered. We discovered shared interests, compatible personalities, and a mutual determination to create healthier family relationships than what we'd inherited. My chosen family now includes Madison and Trevor agent Sarah Chin, who became a friend and mentor, professors who recognized my potential, and fellow students who knew me for my character rather than my criminal associations. We gather for holidays and celebrations that feel genuine rather than performed, supporting each other through challenges without manipulation or ulterior motives. The money recovered from Dad's criminal enterprises funded a scholarship program for students from dysfunctional families, ensuring that others wouldn't face the choice between education and family loyalty that had nearly destroyed my future. Madison and I serve on the scholarship committee, using our experience to identify and support young people trapped in similar circumstances. 3 years later, I'm completing my PhD in biochemistry, while Madison teaches business ethics at a community college, both of us using our experiences to prevent others from falling into the traps that defined our childhood. Dad's letters from federal prison remain unopened. Some family relationships are too toxic to rehabilitate, and acknowledging that truth has been liberating rather than tragic. The wedding that was supposed to be Madison's perfect day became the beginning of our family's reckoning with decades of lies and manipulation. But from that devastating foundation, we built something authentic and sustainable that honors our mother's memory while rejecting our father's legacy of deception. So here's what I want to know from all of you who've stuck with me through this incredible journey. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Have you experienced that moment when everything you thought you knew about your family turned out to be wrong? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I know I'm not the only one who's had to navigate family betrayal and find justice on the other side. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach other people who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family situations. And definitely subscribe, because I share more stories about overcoming family trauma and building the life you deserve, not the one you inherited. Share this video with anyone who needs to know that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you're born into. Thank you so much for being part of this community and for supporting survivors of family manipulation. Remember, justice might take time, but it's always worth fighting for, and you're stronger than the people who tried to control your story.